last section and last demo for the day. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, thank you very much. Adele, I saw you had a question for Chandra. Did you want to ask him that?
No, sorry, I misclicked it.
Oh, no problem. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The slides I have
Nick,
were for...
can I give you a short introduction?
Oh, yes, of course.
So this has been in the works for at least 6 months. When we started with this call, we had the independent publisher connector demos, like Chandra just did, and Nick said, "Oh, I have a connector to show." And then we were talking about it, think, yeah, but what he wants to show, it's very useful for a lot of people. We want to give him some more time because we think his story is good. So, but well, long story short, it took a long while. So I'm very happy that you're here. And I just wanted to say that before you start. So go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to have to move through the slides pretty quickly. This was an hour-long presentation when I gave it at Summit in Orlando a couple weeks ago. So I'll have to go through this pretty quickly. There is some I can skip over. To give you a short preview of what we're doing, it's going to be a fully dynamic connector. So the connector runs completely dynamic. The connector shell itself that lives inside of Power Automate really is just, it's like a meta programming sort of thing. So really cool. I'll get into it right away. So this is about me. I like to code. I like stuff. I'm going to go through this stuff quickly. I'm going to skip by a bunch of this. Amjad did a great job talking about what connectors are, so I'm not even going to speak to these slides. But I will get into some of the interface that we're all familiar with. This is how we make our connectors. You can do it this way, and in this point and click, the boring normal way to do it. But you can't do advanced things in here, with the exception of policies. So what I'm going to talk about is in the Swagger editor. So you can get to that by clicking the little guy here, or you can write it in something else. But this is what we'll be using for the kind of primary. This is what I'm talking to here, is the actual connector subdata, the raw code that we're going to be looking at. So the standard features that we have in connectors are normal things. This is sort of the format that we need to put into it, and we've got the operation, and this is the HTTP method that we're using, the parameters that come into it, and the responses. Some of the things that you need to know is that Power Automate's super picky about formats. Sure, as independent publisher authors, you guys have all seen this, where it has to be a string always, and if it's not a string, you have to type convert it. And Power Automate will enforce that and break your flows if things come out in the wrong format. These are the types and formats that are available in the standard connectors. I apologize, I'm moving through the standard stuff so quickly because I'm trying to move us along. So just kind of going through that quick, I assume this is something you guys already know. What we're going to talk about today are the dynamic values, the dynamic schema, and the policies. There's also custom code, but I'm not going to get into that. We're just going to focus on these three things here, and I'm going to try my best to get through this so that we can have a time for a demo. So the first thing we're going to look at is the dynamic values. And this is in the connector documentation as MS dynamic values and MS dynamic list. There's two of them, and I don't really know the reason why there's two, but it doesn't hurt to include both. So what is a dynamic value? It's something like this, where you want to say, hey, we want to have a list here, a drop-down list, but we don't know what it's going to be in that list until we ask the server what has in it. What's in that list. So the dynamic values allows you to reach out and ask your API for what should populate a list in the dropdown. And the way that looks is like this in the connector schema. So as you build out your schema, you're going to be using this XMS dynamic values and XMS dynamic list. And what that does is this is a post request to this endpoint. And it requires this parameter of resource type. And in order to get the resource type, it needs to call this other parameter. So we had this other operation called get resources documented elsewhere, and it looks just like this. It has its own operation ID, its own URL, and its own HTTP method. And it then returns data with a name and a resource. And we use this configuration to populate the drop-down list here. So how does that work? We put it into the parameters here. So if you put it into a parameter for an operation, which is what you see here with the dynamic values and the dynamic list, then it's basically just saying, hey, we need this for the URL. And like I said, this is going to reach out and get this parameter data. So what's happening is you see we have this resource in the path. So resource is the name of this variable. And this is saying
Nick,
we're going to get...
So
Yeah.
I think we're not looking at what you're talking about. We're still on the dynamic values slide, and you're
really?
saying yes.
Boo. Let me
yeah.
try
Oh,
the
now
other
it's
way.
understanding dynamic values I'm looking at.
Yeah, my connection upload is terrible here. I've got the other way to do this. I'm going to do the present in Teams option. See if that works. Okay, can you see the slide?
It's loading on my side.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. I'm going to jump us ahead. So this is where I was talking, and now I get to use laser pointer. That's fun. Okay, so let me explain a little bit more about what's going on. In this operation, we need to get items by resource, and that's that drop-down list. So this is going to say, we need this resource type. So in order to get the resource type, we need to ask for this resource. So you're basically saying we're going to get this resource value, and in order to get that, we're going to make a call to this XMS dynamic values, which is a totally different operation. So when we make that call out, we're going to call get resources, and then these two things talk about the data that comes out. One of them specifies the title, so we're going to show the user the title, but we're going to use the value of it differently. So we can have the machine readable value here, and then the human readable value here. So what's presented in the dropdown is the human readable value, and then what's put in here is the machine value. So this is what happens, is it makes a call to the get resources. So if you saw in the previous slide, it says get resources. This is what that operation looks like. And this is all still inside the same connector definition file. And so you can see all this is doing is just a get request to resources, and it comes back with an object with key and name and resource. And this is going to be our human readable, and this is going to be our machine readable one. This is an example of what it looks like when it comes out. So here's how the whole thing flows. We've got in order to make this post request here, we need to know what parameter we want. So we have to ask the resource type and say, hey, we're going to say, get me a list of resources. That makes this JSON request out, and it gets this array that comes back with all the different resources. And you can see that the name here is mapped to the name there. And then the resource, you can only tell this because it's different capitalization. But the resource then is the machine readable one, and that resource is going to get mapped back up into there. So now we've got this cool, fully dynamic thing that in order to get a list here, we're going to see what we're going to ask the server for what those values are. So we can take this a step further. I want to get a little further ahead. And one of the things we can say is we've got a example API response, and that is saying that we want to say here's the topic. This is the attributes is an array kind of deep inside of here. But how do we present the list of attributes in a dropdown? So here we want to say we're going to use the skill as the human readable part, and then for the machine readable part, we're going to say Nick is kind of bad at public speaking. So in order to do this, we're going to use this value collection. So that means that when your API response has it coming back, and it's not just a simple array, like a simple list of items, you can actually look kind of a little bit further down, and you can get this nested item. So you can say that this item then, this attributes is going to be where the collection of values is. And then within that, we can say skill, this is going to be the human readable, and then the rank is going to be what we're going to use for the machine readable. And this is what it would look like inside of your connector definition. So that's cool for dynamic values, but let's go a little bit further and let's say, well, we've got this dependent values, right? So essentially here, this is one of our connectors for contact form 7. And what's happening here is it's saying, well, we need to pick out so we want to find out what form we want for this trigger. So what's happening is it's going to say, well, pick the website that has our plugin installed, and then from that website, we're going to reach out and find out the list of forms. But you can't get the list of forms until you've actually picked the website. So to do that, we've got 2 parameters in here, and I'm using the references here because this connector ended up reusing it all over the place. So this is a cool little thing that you can use to reference parameters. So essentially, this is our trigger here. So anyway, it has 2 parameters that it needs. First is this header parameter, which is the website URL, and then it needs the form parameter in the path. So in order to get the header, it has here you can see the X dynamics values, and that's just doing the drop down for the header. So that's the one for the WordPress site URL. And that's going to get the list of domains. And so that just calls this other operation. But then to get the form, which is the list of forms, then it needs to call the X dynamic values. That's a little further down. Here's X dynamic values here calls get the forms, but you can see there's a new parameter, or there's a new block that appeared that I haven't talked about yet, and that is parameters. So you can see this one here for X dynamic values doesn't have the parameters, and then this one does. So that means that this one requires this WP site URL, which is this guy, and that's how you can then make it dependent. So now when it tries to fill out this one and present it to the user, it says, oh, we can't do this yet. We need to fill out this parameter, and then it goes back and it looks up here for where that parameter is. So that's where it looks. I think the slides here kind of describe this. Yep, so there's the form ID parameter. And now this is just everything I just spoke about. So here we go. So when we get into what the actual, we're going to take a look at the next part of this, and that is the dynamic schema. So dynamic schema is the other cool part. And that's basically saying the first part here, we've selected our resource type. We did that with the X dynamic values, but then this is all the stuff that we have to submit. And this is the X dynamic schema. So what this is saying is we know the server has told us the resources that we can work with. We're going to work with a coupon. And then when we choose coupon, we need to know what the shape of that coupon object looks like. And we're actually depending on the server to tell us what the shape of the object looks like. So that's going to go through something called the XMX, the dynamic properties. And this is in the, this one happens to be passed as a body to the post. But the resource schema is going to be then another parameter, and it's going to be the body. And we're using this dynamic properties to get that list of, to get that schema. So essentially, what that means is we've got the magic endpoint here. So this resource schema operation is this guy over here. And that's saying that we're going to make this call to the server, and it's going to be an options request to the same to this endpoint with that initial coupon item that we picked from the dropdown. We're going to make this options request, and then when that data comes back, it looks like this. So it comes back with all of these things. And we say that the schema that we're interested in is in this get object item. So this is what that request looks like. So if we make this request here, and this is actually the options request to this. So we make an options request here, then we get back this, and the get item here has this data that comes back. So if you can control your API, if you can control what comes back from it and have it come back in formatted data like this, you're able to use this to describe the objects and have it be fully dynamic. This is how this is directly used to render these fields over here. So this is coming from our end server installed onto the person's WordPress site, and then that's actually describing itself to Power Automate at runtime. So when you go to build this out, it's fully dynamic. So if you were to customize the WordPress side, then it will be customized on the Power Automate side instantaneously at the time of build. So a couple of things to know is that the operation ID for the resource schema has to exist in your connector, so you have to actually put it in there. It doesn't need to be public, but you have to write the definition for it. The one you want to use is called XMX Dynamic Properties. There's only two. There's Dynamic Schema as well, but you only really need to use the new one. I don't know why there's two. There's probably some kind of backwards compatibility reasons for that. And then the response from JSON needs to be in the open API format. So that's the same format that you're writing your connector definitions in. You need to provide that back from your server. And so if you were going to put it all together, this is how you'd be able to write the connector specification just one time and send that off and get it certified. But then any updates that you want are fully dynamic, handled outside of Power Automate. So that's what we're doing with our WooCommerce connector. It's 100% driven by the client side, which means that different users of the WooCommerce connector are going to see different interfaces on Power Automate using the same connector definition. So this means that you're not going to talk to Amjad a whole lot. Sorry, Amjad, because once you've written this, then it becomes fully dynamic and you're able to control it outside of the connector definition space. And this is what that looks like. With a fully dynamic connector, we essentially have complete coverage of the entire API, but it's covered in just these 6 actions or 7 actions. So we've got the trigger, and then we have a create, delete, find, a get, and an update. And then there's another one here for batch operations. But these all kind of translate over to the HTTP verbs, if you're familiar with those at all. So what that means is the create does a post, the delete does the delete. And so you can see this is all like pretty cool the way it's engineered, because now if you understand the APIs, you can see how this directly maps, and it becomes very understandable because we've done it across everything the same way. So as we keep going, you can see that you only really have to read one connector. So you really only have to read one of these operations to know how everything works. So essentially, if you understand one of the actions, you understand all of the actions because it's all engineered in the same way. And there's more to go over here with the, so I'll go over this more in the demo, and I think we still have time if I keep going quickly. I'll go to that in the demo. So yeah, let's skip over the rest of this because now I start to get into policies. I'm gonna stop here because this is the coolest part. I didn't want to, and I'll go into the demo instead. So I'm gonna exit here, and we'll go to the demo. I don't know that I understood your question, Rebecca. Okay, so here is.
So it's more about you obviously have to define something. So you define more generic kind of actions, but what you do in these actions is totally depending on how something on the other end is configured, or.
Totally right. Yep. So this trigger, we only have one trigger, and it's called when a WooCommerce event happens. And then from here, you pick what resource type you want to work with. So let's say, hey, when an order, or say, wait, like when a coupon, and then from here, you can see it's dependent. So the first list there, it reached out already. That's kind of cached, but now it just asked for, well, when a coupon is updated. Now your trigger is for when a coupon is updated. but you can easily change it, and you can say when an order, and then we'll wait for it to load. You can say when an order has the status changed, now your trigger has changed. You haven't had to change anything in the trigger, but you can see it's fully dynamic. So essentially, this whole coupon section doesn't even appear unless you've turned on coupons in your store. So you won't see coupon as an option because it knows when you do it at build time to ask the server what the capabilities are, and then the server describes itself, and then that's how the whole thing works. And the same thing works across all of the different ones. So we can see we only have a couple of actions. So this one's find a list. So this one, you can see it says find a list of customers, and this is what the search parameters are. So we pre-fill, because the server can tell us what these things look like. We pre-fill all of the parameters here. So it's very similar to what you'd see in like the Dataverse connector. And you can see if I switch it to order, the whole field, the whole form changes. So I switched to order, and now it's going out and it's asking for what does an order look like? And you can see it's totally different. And that works on the back end like this. So the first thing it does is it asks for a list of resources. And that's all we're doing here is we get a list of resources. And then if we wanted to get a product, so this would be to get a single product, for example. Now we get, or I'm sorry, this is a list of products. But because I've built it to HTTP standards, the only thing we need to do is pop this over to options. And options are basically saying, what is this? It's an options request is used to get kind of detail or options about what it's seeking. So we're using the options request here to provide us with the API schema, which you can see is all in this Microsoft kind of Swagger API schema format. And this object that it returns, you come back, you go to this resource here for product, and it tells you how to use it for all the different things. So the schema here describes the object itself, but if you were going to make a GET request, then the GET request is a different sort of request. So when you say get the product, then you have all these options that are available. So this is how you then would search for products. But you can also make a post request to the same endpoint. And if you were going to make a post, then this is what it's going to look like. So this is how we're returning all of the options here, and it becomes a very understandable thing across the entire space. I've shown you 2 endpoints, and now you understand the entire space of the entire implementation, and it can be easily extended. And just as long as we build to that standard, then it will just extend the whole thing across the entire API space of the WooCommerce connector. We're at time. Did I cover this? Does this make sense?
I think this was great. It was informative, it was educational, it gave examples. This was fantastic. Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you for, I don't know, rushing a little bit too, because I'm sure you had so much content to cover, but that was fantastic.